Serious, what was the scariest? We need to leave. Now. Gut feeling that you've ever experienced? My brother and I were kids, playing hide and seek, in the front yard of our house. My brother was 3, and I was 6. My brother was supposed to be counting and finding me, but he was taking forever, so I peeked around the side of the house, to see what was taking so long. He had lost interest in the game, and was standing near the front gate, which led to the street. As I'm looking, I see a brown car pull up, with 2 men inside. The car wasn't familiar, and neither were the men. They both got out of the car, and approached my brother. They started asking him questions, and moving closer to him. I remember feeling panicked. I had learned about stranger danger in school, and knew this wasn't right. I ran around the side of the house, flew through the back door, and screamed, "Someone is trying to kidnap Steve." My dad didn't hesitate. He got up and flew through the front door. When the men saw my dad coming through the door, they bolted and peeled out. From that day forward, we weren't allowed to play in the front yard anymore. It's a really scary memory for me. Does Anne, I need to go home now, feeling, count? And it wasn't me, but my mom. Anyway, I was around 12 or so, and my mom left to run an errand, leaving me alone. Very soon after she left, the doorbell rang. This was weird, because we lived on a hill with only 2 neighbors, we all kept to ourselves, and we just didn't get random visitors. Thanks to some conveniently placed picture frames, I could see out the door, without being seen. I look out, and see a young man I don't recognize. He's dressed in a t-shirt and jeans and something just feels off. So, I ignore him, and wait for him to leave. But he doesn't. He lingers and starts smoking. Again, this is an isolated hill, I'm alone, and now I'm getting scared. I go and hide, and plan to wait for my mom. Except she just left, had a few errands to run, and I couldn't reach the phone without the guy seeing me. As I'm trying to figure out what to do, my mom comes home. She runs in and asks if I'm okay. Apparently, she got this random go home now urge. She hadn't even run her first errand yet but turned around immediately. Found the guy in our yard and asked what he needed. I guess he muttered something about looking for someone, or something to that effect, and my mom told him to leave. Apparently, he was acting very strangely, and made my mom nervous. To this day, I have no idea what he wanted, and no idea how my mom knew to come home. But I am very grateful she did. Me and my little sister went camping in the woods, very close to our house, when we were kids. We'd seen this bald guy with a blue shirt and a dog walking around, which isn't unusual for the area. You'll often see people walking and say hello. For some reason though, I just got this tight feeling in my chest, and my sister must have too, because we both just gave each other this look. I don't know what it was that made me do it. This is very out of character for me, but I took a photo of the back of him, as he was walking away. A while later, we see the same guy again near the lake. He comes over, and asks about the tent we're carrying, where we'll be setting up, and, are we camping with our dad? We say yes, we're just going to see him now, a lie. We must have had the same moment of psychicness, because we walked off up a fork in the path, until we were out of view, then looked at each other and jumped down a path hidden by the bushes and waited behind them on the parallel trail for a bit. The guy watched us walk off, pretended to play with his dog, until he couldn't see us, then turned around, and ran up the path after us. Thankfully, he didn't see us hidden, and carried on up straight, where he thought we'd gone. We decided camping was a bad idea, and went home. That evening my mom shows us a post in the local residents group, which is a picture of the same bald guy, trying to break into someone's house. Apparently, he'd just been walking around trying people's front doors, and claimed to be a repair guy when he was stopped. I dread to effing think what his intentions were, but it was very lucky, me and my sister knew those woods so well, otherwise we wouldn't have thought to go down one of the hidden paths. I was at a family gathering, basically a reunion, but just for family, within reasonable driving distance, probably 30 people altogether. It was at County Park on a small lake with some grills and buildings, just an empty hall, with some picnic tables inside. You could rent for this kind of stuff. The sky started darkening as a storm was approaching. All the coolers, chairs, balls and other kids' toys, etc. were brought into the building anticipating the rain. The plan was to wait it out, since afternoon showers are common just about every day in the summer. Something in the air didn't feel or smell right even though it appeared to be just a regular afternoon storm. Hair on my neck was standing up and I was in full flight mode. Can't really describe it. The feeling in the pit of my stomach can only be described as absolute dread. I told my wife to take my daughter and get in the car. My brother-in-law took one look at my face and said, "What's wrong?" Apparently, I was white as a ghost. It wasn't even raining yet and I was full on panic, yelling for everyone to leave. Something isn't right. No one else was that worried, mostly concerned with how I was acting. I went out to the car, and as soon as I was about to turn the key, the tornado sirens went off. We were not far from wherever they put those, or they are just stupidly loud, because it was deafeningly loud. Now the rest of the family is pouring out of the building to their cars, kids crying, and I look across the lake, maybe a few miles in the distance, and see a funnel cloud. Got the hell out of there, as did everyone else. The building we had rented for this family barbecue thing was completely annihilated, literally, just a slab of concrete and a shit ton of debris all around. It was hit dead on by an EF3. Wednesday midday run along a beautiful river pathway near my apartment block. About 1 kilometer in, I felt people watching me, and directly turned around and ran home, even though I did not see anybody. Closed the 2 magnetic gates leading up to my door, and didn't see anybody around or follow me. About 10 minutes later, 2 guys were at my front door, trying to push it in. I was, luckily, on the other side of the door at that moment, and pushed it back closed with all my force, and began screaming. I managed to security lock the front door, and text my apartment block for help. I was on the 2nd floor, and they obviously watched which apartment I went into. Looking back at the apartment's security cameras, they were able to see the 2 guys pull apart the magnetic security gates, 2 of them. The block then quickly changed the gates to a mechanic lock that cannot be pulled apart. I bartend, and years ago, I kicked this guy out because he was acting very strange, muttering under his breath that he would kill my other customers, just really hostile. He had missing fingers on one hand, and he was kind of a bigger guy. After bar close, I was almost finished counting money, so, like an hour after everyone left, and I was just about to leave, and I had that gut feeling. I looked out the window, and that guy was standing on the corner, watching me in a ski mask. I know it was him, because of the build. As soon as I grabbed my phone, he took off, but the cops know who he is. Now, he has a vendetta out against me, and he's well known around town. He's effing nuts. I was freshly married in my early 20s, living in Fallbrook, California. My husband, ex, was a Marine, and was at work, and I was driving home from visiting family further south. In order to get into Fallbrook, you have to travel along this long dark and windy street, called Mission Road. It's already a super dark night, about 11 p.m., and it's a little foggy as well. I'm slowing down and coming around this slight bend in the road, and all of a sudden, the hair goes up on my neck, and I feel incredibly anxious. About 5 seconds later, a young woman jumps out of the brush, directly ahead of me, maybe 50 feet away, on the left-hand side of the road, while waving her arms in the air, and gesturing frantically for me to pull over. I swerved a bit to the right, slowing down even further, but I did not stop. She was young, maybe early 20s, or even late teens, and a little dirty, and I was immediately conflicted over continuing to drive. But something told me not to stop under any circumstances. I got further up the road, slowed a little more, and dialed 911, with one shaky hand. The dispatcher said she'd send someone to check, but encouraged me not to feel badly. Apparently, there had already been calls about this girl over the last hour, and they were unable to find her when police followed up. I heard, a few weeks later, about some carjacking or robbery attempts in the area. Very relieved, I listened to my instincts that night. I was at the state fair with my mom and my best friend. Friend and I were looking at the rides and the games. This creepy guy and his blonde girlfriend kept babbling at us about taking headshots, and that he was a modeling agent. He just seemed off and really sleazy, and the girl was giving me the creeps, so I pretended that I saw my mom telling us to come, and grabbed my friend and dragged her off. She was close to 5 feet 8 inches, and not a small girl, 13 years old. I was 4 feet 9 inches and around 65 pounds, at 14 years old. A few days later, there's a news story, and rumors going around the school, about 2 girls being kidnapped, assaulted and murdered. They were taken from the fair, the same day we were there, just few hours later. The creepy couple were Gerald and Charlene Gallegos, serial killers. I was 12 at the time, and my favorite thing in the world was spending the night at my grandma's house. We lived in the sticks at the time, and my grandma lived closer to the nearest town. Thursday night was Grandma's night. I felt something off one Thursday night, and asked my mom if I could just stay home with my mom and dad. They reluctantly agreed. I went home, watched some TV, and went to bed. My bedroom was on the adjoining wall to the living room. I wasn't really asleep, but I heard my mom keep saying my dad's name, over and over again, with a hint of panic. I sneak out to the living room, and my dad is on the couch with his head tilted back, snoring, really loud. Which wasn't uncommon, but my mom was beside him, shaking him, and telling him to wake up. She yelled at me to go back to bed. I didn't obviously. I snuck to their bedroom to call 911. I told the dispatcher that my dad was asleep, and my mom was trying to wake him up, but she couldn't. Eventually, the phone call went to the living room, and my mom talked to the dispatcher. They sent an ambulance to the middle of nowhere. My dad had taken a bottle of diazepam to try to commit S. I remember sitting on the floor and holding his hand and repeating over and over that I loved him. The ambulance came and took him to the hospital. Lights and sirens the whole way. We didn't know what happened during that time, but we found out a day or so later, and that is when our world changed. I am very sure, if I did not call 911 that night, that my dad would have succeeded, and it would have probably have drove my mom over the edge as well. And I have no idea why. I didn't want to stay the night at my nanny's. I just had that feeling that I needed to go home. I stopped by a friend's house to watch a ball game. He, his wife and I were just relaxing, and someone knocked on the door. It was the middle of the afternoon. He opened it up. He was expecting others might come by, also. I hear him greeting someone. The guy was his brother I had never met, but had heard about. Very sketchy looking guy, meth teeth, scrawny, long greasy hair. My friend had told me that he had a brother who lived in the area, who had a serious drug problem. Buddy is talking to his brother about nothing, and the guy gets a call on his cell. Whoever called, all he told them was, "Not yet, I'll call you later." Seems pretty obvious, this guy has come to rob, and most likely to take out witnesses. I look at my buddy, it seems he has come to the same conclusion. Now, my buddy's wife is a no-nonsense type of woman, sweet, but athletic. On the tall side, she had left the room to go to the bathroom, or so she said. She comes back in the room with a handgun. I'm thinking, WTF did I walk into? But she calmly says, "Ron, you're strung out, and came here with bad intentions. You need to quietly leave. If you get any ideas, Chris, their son, is sitting outside, in his truck, to make sure you go." Ron doesn't say a word, he just turns and goes out the door. We can hear his old pickup drive away rapidly. Chris come in and says, "He's gone. I don't think he's coming back." They ask me to leave, so they can decide what to do. They have already called the police, who are well acquainted with Ron. The next morning, my buddy calls me. The police said they found his brother in the trailer park where he lived, murdered with multiple gunshots. They are guessing he was in serious drug debt and had come to rob his brother. I told my buddy I was sorry. He said, "Don't be." Years ago, I was at a club with some friends. I was at the bar, and for some reason, looked down at the other end of the bar and saw two guys quietly arguing. They tried to keep from being overheard, but I saw their agitated face. I went back to my group of friends, and told them we should go. This was a popular club, and it took us forever to get in, so they didn't want to leave. I don't know what came over me, but I picked up my friend's girlfriend. She was barely 5 feet tall, and started walking to the door. She was kicking the entire time, and the rest of the party followed me outside telling me to put her down. When we got outside, we heard the distant pop, pop, and people screaming. We looked at each other for a second, then ran for our cars. I forgot to put her down, and was still carrying her over my shoulders. Update. Dang, I didn't think this would blow up. It was the early 1990s, and we were at a club in Miami. If I recall correctly from the local news, it was a drug deal that went bad between two groups. No one was killed, but they wounded each other, and a couple of innocent people. LOL, I'm still not carrying her today. The legend are false. Those two eventually got married, and they mentioned me in their speech, something about the other groomsmen holding me back, so that I don't get the urge to carry her across the doorway. I was in Taco Bell with my daughter, and I saw a guy come in and back out, with a t-shirt over his hand. I told her to dump her tray, and get moving. We went out to the car quickly, and left. Found out, later on the news, that the guy robbed the place, with the gun hiding under his t-shirt. Similar situation here. Wendy's. Guy with a small duffel bag, and awkwardly holding a t-shirt. Never checked the news, but we thought the same thing. Place got oddly quiet, when he walked in. I'm a teenage girl, who worked at a restaurant and pizza shop. I was harassed, by these two men one weekend, who were totally wasted, so, they were kicked. The following weekend they returned, and they tried to sit next to me, at counter, which is connected to bar, but they couldn't, so, they chose a table across from me, and moved both their seats to look right at me, then would only order from my counter instead of our waitresses, were staring at me, making jokes, about killing a girl, and kind of just freaking me out. I ended up going to our upstairs employees only section, to fold boxes, up there all alone down in hallway, where nobody would hear me. I ended up feeling sick to my stomach, as I heard someone walk up the stairs and whispering, and I closed the door and turned my music off, and texted my mom. The two followed me up there, then tried to go down that unlocked hallway, but another waitress noticed them bothering me, and caught them trying to come after me. I just had a gut feeling, as I heard them coming, and she came down the hallway and told me, to be quiet, and hold our body weight against the door. We waited for them to leave, as they stood there, waiting for me to come out, before making some remarks, about not knowing where I was, then going back down. My dad came and picked me up early, because I just felt so off. The following day, I had to come in for another shift, and as I was clocking out, the TVs started playing a true crime documentary, on a girl with the same name as me, who was kidnapped and assaulted by two men. My stomach dropped, and shortly gave my notice after that. I realized, I wasn't going to be protected there, and wouldn't be surprised, if they returned again. Years ago, before cell phones, I was driving home, from dropping my husband at the train at 4:30 a.m. Only me and one other car on the road. He started turning where I turn, twice, so, I didn't go home. I went to an all-night gas station, and called the police. I gave them a description of his car. 3 weeks later, he was arrested. Turns out, he was following women home, and driving past their house, and doubling back to them. No one had noticed his car. I'm glad I paid attention. Great awareness. My husband used to say I'm crazy, that I do loops around our area, if there's a car behind me, when I turn off the main road to our little road. I tell him, I'm not having some weirdo follow me home. He got followed by some crazy road rager once, with our son in the car, and had to pull a couple U-turns to lose him. He doesn't think I'm crazy anymore. People are. Sitting in my friend's backyard, with their two kids, my husband, and another friend, enjoying pizza that my host made. It was a beautiful, clear day, with no real wind. We're having a great time, just out of the pool, and hungry for pizza, when I suddenly felt on edge. I looked straight at the kids, about 8 and 10, or so, years old, and just said, "Get in the house." We all scramble, and a second later, we heard creaking, and maybe 5 seconds after it started, this big branch fell off of their pine tree, onto the table, where we were sitting. Thankfully, no one was hurt, besides having to pick pine needles out of our pizza. I can only assume that I subconsciously heard the branch starting to give. When I was around 9 or 10, my mom took me with her on a business trip to a nearby city. This is before smartphones, when you still had to MapQuest stuff. We were supposed to meet my mom's friend and coworker at the mall for something. Since her friend had given her directions, we didn't bother going down to the hotel computer to print directions. I think there was maybe one there. This was around 2000 to 2001. We got lost, and ended up pulling into a small storage unit place, to pull out a map. It was just 2 rectangular buildings, maybe a total of like 20 units. I don't remember why, exactly, but I was really scared, and kept crying and asking, if we could just go back to the hotel. I assume, she got fed up, with her kid crying in the passenger seat and she couldn't quite figure out where we were, so, we went back to the hotel. The next day, they found the bodies of 2 teenagers, in one of the units we pulled in front of. I don't believe in spirits or ghosts, but something similar happened to me. I was on a snorkeling day trip in Vanuatu, and we were taken to various locations by the tour guides. It was all lots of fun. One of the stops, later in the day, was an island called Hat Island, where I felt this weird ominous energy. There was nothing strange looking on the island. It just felt weird, like an invisible bad force surrounding us. It wasn't threatening. but it felt tense and dark and sort of urgent. I remarked on it to my mother, and she agreed. I don't usually notice energy or karma, I'm not a mystical person, so, this was really weird. Some years later, I was watching a documentary, and learned that this island was the burial site of a legendary chief. Even worse, all of his wives and his entourage were buried along with him, alive. We're talking, possibly hundreds of people. Apparently, this site is well known for this, but we had no idea at the time, because we were just there in a boat to snorkel. I'm a rational scientific sort of person, but this experience really challenged my thinking. I was hammock camping, while riding my motorcycle through Arkansas. I had a dream that I was getting pulled over by the cops on my bike. The flashing lights were super bright in my eyes. And as I woke from my dream, I noticed my blue hammock tent is lighting up like flashing police lights. I immediately felt an adrenaline spike and went into full flight mode. Packed my shit up faster than I could even put my boots on. Hopped on my bike in my underwear and rode a mile to the top of the campground where the showers were. The second I stepped into the shower cabin, the sky opened up, and cloud-to-ground lighting started striking trees in the campground every 10 to 15 seconds. I could have been royally effed up by a lightning strike had I stayed sleeping between two of them. When we were in our teens, my sister and I were walking our dog in our local forest area very close to our childhood home. We were about to leave, and had just clipped our dog back up, when a lady appeared out of nowhere and started chatting to us. She was odd. She told us her dog would love some socialization with our dog, and could we go back with her for 5 minutes. What I hadn't clocked, but my sister had, was that her dog was nowhere to be seen. The lady was almost rounding us up to head back towards the forest, when, little did I know, my sister had spotted a van out of the corner of her eye. I was still oblivious at this point. Suddenly, my sister screams, "Dad!" And to our luck, my dad had finished work and was now out on a run. He starts waving and running towards us, and as we turned back around, the lady had vanished. My sister looks back over at the van and sees the lady closing the passenger door and it speeding off. Dog still nowhere to be seen. I believe we were minutes away from abduction. It was divine intervention that my dad happened to be at the right place at the right time. As a full-grown adult, I was walking my dogs in a woodland just after dusk when a guy popped out of nowhere and was mumbling something about how he thought there was a lost dog. Something about his demeanor and almost lack of further questions and communication really put me off. My dogs then went berserk barking at him. Normally, I'd tell them to be quiet and apologize to the person, but something told me to let them do their thing. The guy just watched us without saying anything for 30 seconds, longer than a normal person would, almost as if he was considering his next choice. I guess, when he saw I had no intention of calling my dogs off, he gave up whatever he was planning, and moved on. I skedaddled straight home. I was scuba diving in Asia. 3 of us went to a reef that hadn't been dived on before, which bottomed out at 50-70 meters depth. 5 minutes into the dive, we all get a very bad feeling, like we were being watched. Ignored it, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Further 10 minutes into the dive, we all watched the silhouette of a white shark glide slowly past, right on the periphery of where we could see. Then glide back in the other direction, a minute later. The decompression stop, to get out, was the scariest 3 minutes of my life. My little brother and I were tossing a baseball around, near dusk, at the bottom of our property, 30 wooded mountain acres way, in the middle of nowhere. It had gotten dark enough that we were just about to call it quits, when we heard the single most horrifying scream we've ever heard, coming from the trees, just beyond the edge of the clearing. Imagine a woman screaming in mortal agony, writhing in the most wretched torment imaginable, every tortured scream from horror movies, war movies, anything you've ever heard, nothing compared to this. Even now, decades removed from hearing it, the hair on my arms and neck stands up, just thinking of it, and it's made even worse by the realization of what it actually was. A mountain lion. Full-grown female mountain lions scream loudly when they're in heat, and it sounds like a human woman being torn to pieces by the devil himself. To hear that, 2 kids alone in the dark, in the middle of nowhere, was about as terrifying as it gets. I grabbed his arm and ran, scrambled, fear levitated up the hill, faster than ever before or since. It's been 25 years, and I still haven't fully unpuckered. Many years ago, I went with my then girlfriend to one of her female friends' houses, who was married to a guy I'd never met before. I'll call them Jack and Jill, so I can tell the story a little easier. We played cards with them for a couple hours, and it was a good time, besides an odd feeling I had the whole time I was there. Something just didn't sit right with me being there with them in their home. The best I can explain it is that I was having an anxiety nervous-like feeling, but having no reason to feel that way. After leaving, I told my girlfriend the feeling I had, and that I didn't think we should go back there again, because something wasn't right. Fast forward several months to a year or so later, I forget the exact timeline, Jack murders Jill in that same home, dumping her with his semi-automatic pistol before killing himself with one of the last rounds. No motive. Really horrible stuff that sent shock waves through the community. And it's the only time I've ever had that feeling.